Okay, I think we're going to get started. Welcome to today's Reseller Sales Enablement session, how to host a GitLab meetup. I'm here today with John Coughlin, who's our Meetups Program Manager. My name is Vivian Getz, Channel Success Manager, and I know most of you. We're excited to present today. This is going to be a little bit of a different format. It'll be an interview format between myself and John. And just some housekeeping tips. We will take questions throughout the session on the Q&A box listed at the bottom middle of your screen. So feel free to ask some questions throughout the process. We're going to get ready to get kicked off now. So I'd like to introduce John Coughlin, our Meetups Program Manager. John, can you introduce yourself and give us a little background on your role here at GitLab and your previous meetup experience?
Sure. So I'm GitLab's evangelist program manager, and a big focus for my role is managing our meetups program. I entered into this space as the founder of a co-working space in Brooklyn, actually. The space was called Dumbo Startup Lab. It was one of the first co-working spaces in Brooklyn, and we really catered to like the early stage kind of pre-seed startup crowd and a lot of solo entrepreneurs. And running that business was where I really started to fall in love with community building and creating inclusive kind of communities and organizations. After Dumbo Startup Lab, I transitioned into tech evangelism and really wanted to kind of lean into that community building focus and focus on organizations that are inclusive and innovative. And so I started working for a big e-commerce company in New York, using evangelism to build that company's brand as a great place to work and also an innovative company where engineers and technologists could come and level up their skills and make it an attractive place for people to work. And I did that at a few different e-commerce companies. And ultimately that experience opened the door for me to join GitLab, which is obviously a really innovative organization, not just from their product, but also like the culture and kind of the values of the company and the way that they operate is pretty revolutionary. And so I was really excited to join GitLab and work on building the community here and get more people bought into, our culture, our values, and our product.
Great. I know that there's controversy here and there on what the actual definition of a meetup is. Can you clarify what GitLab's definition of a meetup is?
Yeah, I don't think that there's necessarily controversy around what a meetup is, although maybe there is some and I'm just not aware of it. But I think confusion for sure. For us, we think of meetups as community-driven events. So typically meetups are either very low cost or free events. They happen, in every city and kind of geography. They're not just like major conferences in big cities or, big splashy events in big cities. They're really local community groups that meet at a regular cadence and allow people to form relationships, build up their network, and get educated about things that they find interesting. When I think of GitLab meetups, I think of three types of meetups. So we have like our GitLab meetups, which are the groups that, like me and the GitLabbers actively manage. And, we sponsor these events. There's often GitLab speakers at the events. And they're in some of like the bigger areas, like the bigger hubs where we have a lot of people. We then also have, like the community-driven meetups. So those are, also, GitLab meetups, but they're owned by community members. And they get that same level of support. So sponsoring food and drinks, sending swag, sending GitLab speakers. And those are like the real kind of GitLab meetups. The kind of next category of the meetups would be GitLab adjacent meetups. And those are meetups where the subject matter is really relevant to what we do. So think of your typical DevOps meetup, Kubernetes meetup, an open source group. And a speaker from GitLab will go to that and will provide, the same level of sponsorship and support So the subject matter isn't solely focused on GitLab, but GitLab's kind of perspective and thought leadership in the, that particular space, whether it's open source or DevOps, is really valuable to that community. And so we know we can add value there. So those are the GitLab adjacent meetups. And then, there's kind of like this other category of events where, it might be a GitLabber or a community member talking about, how they love GitLab. But we don't really have a ton of involvement in those events. And so, I think for us, like we're trying to do a better job getting our arms around those events and seeing how we can support and connect with the people that are giving those talks or organizing those groups. But I think that's an area where we still have some work to do. So we've seen our most success so far with those GitLab kind of focused meetups and then the GitLab adjacent meetups.
Great. How do you come up, or how do you help the reseller come up with a compelling topic to actually host one of these meetups? Because if you don't want it to be too narrow focused, can you give a couple examples?
Yeah, I think, figuring out what to talk about and who's going to be the speakers is always the hardest part of planning any meetup. I think particularly for resellers, and for a company like GitLab that has a product that targets developers, there's, always a aspect that's kind of in the back of your head around, what is the story that we want to share with the community. So at GitLab, we do, monthly releases. There's always something new and exciting, that our team can go out and do a talk about. We often have, new integrations, new partnerships, new open source products coming onto our platform all the time. So there's always something new and shiny that, gets our team excited and that people want to go out and talk about. But I think we also need to think about what does the community want to hear. So, in order for the groups to be successful and to have people keep coming back and continue engaging with the community, you need to make sure that you're kind of delivering content that's going to, be valuable to that audience. So for organizers, it's important to understand who your audience is and what they want to hear about. So, for a lot of folks that are attending meetups, that's their first kind of foray, their first interaction potentially with that, language or product or, philosophy, if it's a DevOps meetup. And so, there's going to be people there that have kind of a very, high level understanding of the subject. And so if the content that you're delivering is overly technical, those people can get lost and maybe not want to come back. On the other hand, you'll have people that, are potentially SREs at, the big companies in your area, and they're not going to want to hear an intro to DevOps talk. And so you got to find that right balance of not being overly salesy, not being overly technical, and also not being kind of like overly introduction. And that can be really tricky. I think, one advantage that GitLab has is that, we have a pretty broad application. There's 10 stages, to the DevOps lifecycle where GitLab has features that people can learn about. And so, there's a chance to go kind of broad and talk about multiple stages at a meetup. You can go deep and just drill into one. And that allows you to kind of leverage our product's breadth and depth to tailor the content to those different personas in your audience. I think the other thing that's exciting about GitLab, is because we're often working on some of the latest and greatest stuff like Kubernetes, we do, typically there will be something interesting to that more technical persona who are interested in using these cutting edge tools. But I think you need to balance that kind of overly technical stuff and appealing to that really technical practitioner with making sure that the talks, or at least, if you do 2 talks, at least one of them is accessible to that newcomer to the community. So specific talks, if you're thinking about planning a meetup in the next few months, I think GitLab CI is a really popular part of our product and something that the community is really interested in. Kubernetes, which I already mentioned, and our serverless product that integrates with Knative are all things that we've seen be really well received. And that Kubernetes and serverless talks are really just demos of how people can spin up applications or a Kubernetes instance in 30 minutes or less, but it gives people an interesting kind of, look at GitLab, especially for people that may not, have a GitLab account or have connected their GitLab account to Google Cloud Platform. To be able to see how easy it is to spin up a Kubernetes instance could be really interesting to them.
That's great. So kind of to recap, sometimes the broader kind of hot topics, serverless, Kubernetes, and then we'll get a broader audience, and then you tie DevOps and GitLab under that.
Yep. That's a great way of putting it.
So what, I know we've done multiple, or I've done multiple types of meetups as well. What is your recommended format?
Yeah, I may be a little bit biased, but for me, in my experience at meetups, and I know that kind of meetup culture is very different all over the world. So we were planning meetups in Nigeria last weekend and in June, and those are on Saturdays and they're kind of all-day affairs. My experience is typically like in Europe and North America, and those meetups tend to happen at the end of the workday. And so for those type of events that are happening after work, I always recommend for meetups to try and limit to around 60 minutes of content. I think that any longer than that, and folks can get a little bit overloaded and maybe a little bit tired. And I think, the other recommendation I have is no more than 3 speakers in that kind of 60-minute window. The thought being, the more speakers you have, the more likely someone is to run over their window of time. And then you start kind of pushing out that 60-minute, window of content. And every time you switch speakers, it also creates downtime. And that gives people a chance to get up and leave if they're starting to feel tired. So if you, give the first speaker 30 minutes and then, quickly switch to the next speaker, you're only 30 minutes in, and most of the audience will stay and be engaged with that second speaker. If you split it over 3, by the time, the third speaker gets their turn, you'll probably have lost some audience. And I never feel good when a person comes up to a half full kind of crowd. So I try to, guide people towards that 60 minutes with no more than 3 speakers guidance, but even better is 2 speakers that can give, 30-minute talks, and then you can have plenty of time beforehand and afterward for people to have one-on-one conversations. I feel like that's often where a lot of the magic happens at meetups, is the, kind of personal connections that people make, the chance to approach the speakers and ask questions that they may not be comfortable asking in the room. And for folks that keep coming back to your meetup group, they get a chance to reconnect with old friends. There's, I forget the exact expression, but there's like a saying that people use, the talks as an excuse to come and have conversations. And I think that's really rings pretty true.
That's great. Do you, in terms of actually, presenting, do you try to find a customer, whether they're a community edition customer or a different type of GitLab customer, to get them engaged in like a panel discussion, or how would you recommend involving a actual GitLab user in a broader discussion?
I generally find that talks are more engaging than panels. I feel like panels, folks tend to ramble and you don't really get as much meaningful or actionable insight as you would from a presentation. I think if you're doing meetups really frequently, mixing up the format makes a lot more sense than if you're doing 4 meetups a year. So it really depends on the group. As far as who to engage, the fewer talks from GitLab and our team, the better. Having the community advocate on our behalf and on the kind of behalf of the whole team is a much more powerful message, and will be, I think, resonate much more with the audience than a talk from any GitLabber, even if it's one of our engineers who doesn't care at all about sales and just wants to talk about this cool new way that, we migrate, or the cool things that we did when we were migrating from Azure to GCP. I think there's always going to be that like little thought in the back of the audience's head that, this is kind of a sales driven talk. Whereas, if it's a fellow community member, they know that they're just getting, the honest take, and whether that honesty is kind of, filtered through rose-colored glasses because the person just loves GitLab so much. Like, I think people are more willing to accept that than a talk from the GitLab team. Now, that said, it's not always easy to find, customers or community members to do talks. And so we kind of mix it up. Whenever we have the opportunity to highlight customer stories or user stories, we jump on that. But we're also happy to kind of get our team involved to help us build the community so we can get more of those stories from the community.
Great. Hence the referral I made earlier to controversy. Sometimes if it's too salesy, then the meetup gets a bad rap because it's more of a marketing/sales presentation instead of a true meetup. In terms of formats, I've been to a few that seem to be very engaging, and that was to kind of have everyone go around the room and ask how familiar they are with GitLab and how they're using it. Have you tried a format like that?
So I have not. I think there's value in that. I think the challenge for us would be scaling that, because that requires a higher level of training
And interact
kind of coaching, and a certain type of person who's comfortable leading those discussions. And so I'm not at all against that. I think that, the more you can engage the audience in any type of event, the more interested they're going to be in kind of what you're talking about. But I think that type of content and that type of engagement can be challenging to find the right person for and prepare that person for. And so we've been trying to scale things in a little bit of a different way, where we, are thinking more about following a more traditional meetup format.
Great. Good to know. So what about in terms of demos? Do you recommend that a demo be given at a meetup, or is it part of the agenda, typical agenda, or is it kind of depending on the topic?
Yeah, when I kind of reference talks and presentations, I think that's interchangeable with demos. Demos are really powerful. They're really interesting. There's a bit of that element of risk involved at times, where the audience is kind of on the edge of their seat because they're wondering if the person's actually going to make it through the demo without messing something up, which inevitably happens. I can't recall ever seeing a perfect demo. So yeah, I think demos are great. We actually have, our product marketing team has been doing a great job prepping new content. And so we have a variety of demos for folks that are interested in giving talks about GitLab that we're just starting to kind of roll out to community members who want to give talks about GitLab but aren't sure what to talk about. And so we haven't had anyone deliver those talks yet. They've kind of looked at them and are deciding, now if they're comfortable, taking the leap and going from, curiosity to execution. But I think that in the coming months, we'll see more people taking these demos that we've helped prepare and bringing them to their local communities to show people about some of the stuff. I think the topics are cloud native and digital transformations, DevOps 101, and an intro to our secure capabilities. So there's a lot of different subject matter that we've covered, and our team just started working on these. So I'm sure that the number of these demos that we'll have available will continue to grow.
That's great. And that might lead me to another sales enablement session to go through the demos that are available and how to give them. So thanks. I appreciate that, John. How does the GitLab Meetup Pro account work, and how can resellers leverage that?
So Meetup Pro is, kind of our Meetup portal. And there's a ton of interesting insights and analytics that we GitLab get through our Meetup Pro account. The real value add for the resellers is that it's, if they associate their local GitLab meetup with our Meetup Pro account, we'll cover the subscription fees. But yeah, the rest of that, like the magic of the Meetup Pro account is really the analytics and the ability for us to help manage the groups and update their pages for them and add logos and art and message the users, and really, kind of leverage the entire global network, through a single portal rather than having to, manage 30 or whatever different groups. But yeah, if anyone wants to connect a Meetup group to the GitLab Meetup Pro account, you just need to send me an email. I can provision a key, which is basically a special URL. And from there, you can go and associate your group with our Meetup Pro account, and all of the subscription fees and everything will be covered by GitLab.
And some of the promotion, all the promotional and the artwork and stuff can be repurposed and reused by our resellers.
Yep. So there's templates and things in there that people can pick up and use if they want to.
That's great. How would you, what is your kind of best practices in terms of actual promotion of a meetup, to maximize attendance?
Yeah, I mean, meetup.com itself is a great tool for promoting meetups. So I highly recommend that people use that platform if it makes sense. I know that in some, countries, in some areas, people use other portals for that. So Facebook is a popular one in Eastern Europe, and I know in Japan they use Compass. But if that's, you're choosing between, meetup.com and Eventbrite, or meetup.com and Splash, or, basically if you're able to use meetup.com, I highly recommend it. They have, the community lives there. They have tools to kind of promote, their algorithms are going to promote your events and your group to people that are interested in the topics that your GitLab group is associated with. So folks that are in the, nearby DevOps and open source groups are going to see the GitLab event in their feed because of that association in the Meetup algo, and that'll help you reach the right audience. I think, outside of Meetup, social media is really helpful. A blog, if you have one, sometimes leveraging local event listings or cross-promoting with other Meetup groups. So, if we're spinning up a new Meetup group in an area, I'll, email the organizers of a few groups and say, hey, can you promote this to your members? That can help. Or if you have a local event listing sites, this might only be in some of the bigger cities where this is an option, but at least, I've seen a lot of cities where they'll have, tech listings of all the tech events every week. In New York, we have multiple, events listing sites where you can cross promote. And then, emails, a great way to reach out to people if you have a big email list. And, at GitLab, we also use our SDRs and BDRs to get the word out to local contacts.
That's great. That's great. So if we were to schedule some with our resellers, we would get our, through me and you, we would get our SDRs on the, and BDRs involved in case they're talking to someone in that region. That's right.
Yep. So we'll promote it on our GitLab social, our GitLab Medium blog, through the, SDRs and BDRs, and also, on our events page on our website.
That's great. And for the SDRs and BDRs, it's a great reason to have to call someone.
Yeah.
How to reach them. So that's great. What kind of resources or budget or kind of support can resellers expect from GitLab?
So we talked about Meetup Pro, and that's one of the, kind of benefits. GitLab also covers the costs of food and drinks for the meetups that we sponsor. So the limit there is, $5 per person up to $500. But there is some flexibility on that. So if you're, a few dollars over or in a big city and things are a little bit more expensive, we can be flexible on those numbers. But that's kind of our guideline. We'll send you swag for your event so that everybody leaves with a GitLab sticker for their laptop. We can help with the marketing for the event, and also help find speakers depending on where and when the meetup's happening. If we can find a GitLabber to get there and you need a speaker, we'll try to make that happen.
That's awesome. So kind of to summarize, if you had to list kind of the top 3 to 5 takeaways and best practices on how to get the most out of your GitLab meetup, can you list those for us?
So I think a few of we have a checklist that's on our website that has all of the best practices. I think the things that I would want to highlight, after I've kind of gone through the planning and I'm executing and hosting the meetup, the 3 non-obvious things I recommend people do. One is, the first few guests that arrive to a meetup really set the tone for that meetup. So if the guests walk in and there's, just an organizer there, and, the organizer says hello and then goes on, getting things set up, and that guest goes and sits in the seat by themselves, and then the next person comes in and they see that one person sitting up in the, seats by themselves, then they're going to just follow that person's pattern of behavior and go sit in the seats by themselves. So what you want to do is try and create a welcoming environment with that first person and the first few people that come in, facilitate connections between those folks that are coming to the group. And that way, as the rest of the audience begins to arrive, they see that people are interacting and engaging with each other, and they feel like, okay, this is the norm for this group. This is the social norm that I'm supposed to go and kind of, make connections, have conversations, have a bite to eat. So I think it's really important for the organizers to make sure that they're setting the tone for the group in a way that they want the group to behave. So for me, when I go to meetups, I like to have conversations and make connections. And so I try to pattern that behavior for the audience, and I recommend that organizers, do the same. So
be engaging as soon as the first person gets there to set the tone.
Yep. I think another thing that's really helpful at meetups is to have signs. It's, not an obvious thing, but people are going to be in an unfamiliar space. And you don't want to spend your whole night as the organizer telling people where the bathroom is. So make sure that you have signs that help people get from either the elevator or the street into the meetup space, so you don't have to sit by the front door and escort everyone in. And put up some signs that show people where the bathroom is or where the food is, or kind of where anything that's non-obvious is, so that you don't have to constantly be answering the same question, and you can allow yourself to get into some deeper conversations. And it also just makes people that are coming to your event feel a little bit more comfortable, that they don't need to ask for help to find something like where to go wash their hands before they have pizza.
Great suggestion.
And then, the last suggestion I wanted to highlight is, speaker swag. It's always nice to have a goodie bag to give to the speakers that come to your event, especially if it's a community member or a customer. It could be something as simple as just a t-shirt in a GitLab tote bag with a few extra stickers that they can bring back to their team. But just showing them a little bit extra appreciation, I think goes a long way. A lot of times in New York, I would just call an Uber for them, when we were leaving, and expense the Uber that they took home. So it doesn't even always have to be swag, but just something to show, that you appreciate them taking the time to prepare the talk and coming out on, giving up an evening to be part of the group. I think it is a nice way to show your appreciation to the speakers.
Great suggestion, and one that probably is easily overlooked sometimes.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, if it's a GitLabber coming, you don't need to give them any more GitLab swag. But if it's a community member or a customer, I think it's always nice to show them a little bit of love. It is.
So I'm going to, at this point, open it up to the audience to see if we have any questions. And if we want to put the slide up about resources, we can give everyone a few minutes to see if we have any questions. And John has some great resources listed here, and everything you want to know about GitLab resources, how to run a meetup, and kind of summarizing what John just reviewed, including the checklist. The links are there, and you'll be getting a copy of this in a follow-up email with the link to this on-demand event as well. John, it looks like we have one question. That is, what is your recommended timeline from the start of planning to execution for GitLab Meetup?
It's funny. I know you know this already, Vivian, but for the audience, I actually was having a chat with our sales team about this earlier today. Because we've been doing a few meetups like with 2 weeks notice, which is not ideal. I think the ideal timeframe that we look at is 6 to 8 weeks out. Certainly you can start planning earlier, but in my experience, when you plan too far out, by the time the meetup, you're in that 6 to 8 week window, people's schedules start to solidify and you realize that your plans are changing. And that's been happening here as well. So I think it's good to plan in advance, but where the real magic starts to happen is in that 6 to 8 week window, because people's schedules are solid. People know where they're going to be. And that gives you enough time to book your venue, line up your speakers, get them to prepare their content, and take care of all those other logistics. I think normally we'll start marketing meetups around 4 weeks out, because with your audience, again, if someone RSVPs for a meetup 2 months beforehand, the likelihood of them showing up is much lower than the person that RSVPs 48 hours beforehand, because they're, visibility into what's going to be going on that specific date is much better 48 hours out than 4 months in advance. So I think the 6 to 8 week window is probably the right spot to start planning those events.
And one more question from the audience. In terms of, we talked about promotion, but if a reseller was going under the Meetup Pro account, setting up their meetup that way, do you also put it on the GitLab events page on GitLab.com? Yep.
So we do. I normally do a merge request every 2 weeks with all the new meetups that have been scheduled in that 2 week period. And so that includes, whether the event's on Facebook, meetup.com, Compass, or some other website that I haven't heard of yet, we can add those events there. So it's just another way for us to market events, because the events are happening off meetup.com. Sometimes it's a little bit harder for us to market.
Yeah, no, that's great, because our website gets a lot of searches, and anybody in certain regions, if they look under events, they can find meetups that are no cost to attend. And I would imagine we get a lot of traffic that way as well.
Yep.
Well, it looks like I don't have any additional questions. Anybody out there in the audience, if you have a question, feel free to put it in the Q&A box. If not, thank you so much for attending. We'll just give everyone a minute or two. And thank you, John, for your very insightful, informative interview.
Yeah, I think the one thing that we didn't talk about that I'll just mention quickly is goals for the program. And so for a lot of the things that we're doing in sales and marketing, the goals are associated with like pipeline or IACV. And for meetups, our goal is totally separate. So we're not thinking necessarily about IACV or pipeline coming out of these. For us, it's just about community awareness, and that awareness and kind of community momentum, we believe, is going to connect down the line to increasing those pipeline and IACV and monthly active users numbers that are really important to us. But yeah, just wanted to call that out, that that's the goals for these events, is not lead generation or anything like that. It's really about community building.
Great. And then as a result, kind of by default, with that community building should result in some net new opportunities for our resellers and GitLab. Had one more question that came in, and it was, do you have any tips for increasing female participants in these meetups? So is there some cross meetups we could promote that are more, women engineering developer based?
Yep, I think that's a great suggestion, Vivian. Cross-promoting your events with those types of groups is a great way to start. I think using images, like when you're promoting your meetup on social media or creating the event page, try to include, diverse people in the images so that people that are visiting your event page can see people that look like them, regardless of, like what their kind of, like race or sex or ethnicity is. The other great way to do it is if you can find female speakers for the meetup, because I think that's another way to really engage, like that women in technology audience, is to highlight women speakers. And so I think those are all the kind of like three of the best ways to increase the female participation is what Vivian said, promoting your group with local groups that focused on diversity in technology, using diverse images in your promotion materials, and as best you can, attracting women speakers to participate in your meetups.
Great suggestions, John. Any other questions that we can help you with? We'll just leave it open for another minute, and that you will be receiving links to all relative resources and a link to this recording should you want to share it with any of your colleagues.